We're very glad that all of you are here for this very important program and for this collaboration. In particular, I want to acknowledge some of the movers and shakers that have made a program like this happen, because as you can imagine, these things don't just happen because we want them to. And I want to, in particular, acknowledge from the Pulitzer Center, Rebecca Kaplan, from the School of Public Health, Jen Beard and Juliana Restivo, and from the College of Communications, Ann Donahue. Thank you very much for the work that you did in putting together today's program. I want to also welcome our guests who have been so generous with their time to help us come and to understand this issue. And in particular, I want to welcome all of you to be here. And so now I'd like to turn our program over to Dr. Bindu Kalasan, who is a professor in the Community Health Sciences Department here at the School of Public Health. Bindu.
Thank you, Dr. Cox. So I'm really very excited to moderate this session, and rightly we call it Gun Violence, the stories behind the numbers. And as he was saying, this event is sponsored by the BU Program for Global Health Storytelling, which is a collaborative event between the Pulitzer Center and the Boston University College of Communication, the School of Public Health, and the Activist Lab. And the mission of this partnership is to explore pressing public health topics through the lens of journalism and storytelling. As we know, public health and journalism have much in common. But also, there are many points of collision and great potential for collaboration. And tonight, we will address the topic of gun violence, but we will step away from constitutional rights and the policy debates to focus on the social impact and the trauma to individuals and communities related to gun violence and the way we tell those important stories. Now, since November 2016, news media has been inundated with presidential politics, and some of them have been very shocking and extremely divisive. And during this time, we also witnessed many nationalist expressions, such as in Charlottesville, where citizens were armed to the teeth with guns. While the news about mass shootings and school shootings have made us all numb, the death rates due to the gun violence injuries have jumped to almost 8%. We do not talk about that. There is a raging gun violence epidemic currently going on, and it is driven by the non-fatal gun injuries, and it receives little to no attention. Keeping in mind that in 2015 alone, every single day, on an average, 99 Americans are shot dead, and another 230 will be shot non-fatally. So we have 3 objectives today. The first one is to have a comprehensive understanding about what it is to be a gun violence survivor. Then we will understand about how journalism, other media, advocacy, and research is shaping the narrative around the public health issue of gun violence. And finally, we will find ways for journalists, other storytellers, gun violence activists, and researchers to work together to stir outrage over the fully preventable carnage and thus create social change. Now, as you see, we are missing one panel member who will join us very soon. And let me go ahead and introduce our panel members here. We have 5 distinguished speakers who will first share their experiences with us, and then we will have a question and answer session. So Thea James, right there, is the Vice President of Mission, Associate Chief Medical Officer at Boston Medical Center. She's also an Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine, Assistant Dean in the Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs, and the Director of Violence Intervention Advocacy Program at BMC. This is also, she's also the founding member of the National Network of Hospital-Based Violence Intervention Programs and was appointed to Attorney General Eric Holder's National Task Force on Children Exposed to Violence. Chaplain Tina Sherry is the founder president and CEO of Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. She has over 2 decades of experience as a survivor, serving families impacted by violence, and has received countless awards in recognition of her courageous leadership and tireless peacemaking work. And most recently, she was named one of Boston's 100 most influential leaders of color at Harvard University. And Carlos Javier Ortiz, did I say that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is a director, cinematographer, and documentary photographer who focuses on urban life, gun violence, racism, poverty, and marginalized communities. He's an advocate to social issues and a friend to the marginalized people. Carlos tries to bridge the gap through art and photography, and his work has been exhibited nationally and internationally in a variety of venues. His film, We All We Got, uses images and sounds to convey a community's deep sense of loss and resilience in the face of gun violence. Mark, you want to join us?
Thanks for saving me a chair.
Right in the middle. Mark Barton is Daniel's dad. Mark lost his son Daniel, one of the 20 first graders murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, along with 6 educators. Mark has dedicated himself to bringing people together to find sensible solutions that will prevent such future tragedies and spare other families of the pain of losing a child. He's also the managing director of Sandy Hook Promise, an NGO, and focuses on policy and outreach efforts for gun violence prevention. John Rosenthal is the president of Meredith Management, a Boston-based real estate development firm. He's also a gun owner. He founded Stop Handgun Violence, a Massachusetts-based nonprofit organization that works to lower gun violence through education, public awareness, strategic law enforcement strategies, partnerships, and advocacy for common sense gun laws without banning most guns. Let's find out what he has to say, how he's doing that. And John also founded the Friends of Boston's Homeless, which partners with the City of Boston, and co-founded the Police Assisted Addiction and Recovery Initiative. All this happens only in Boston. So now that you know your panel members, we want to give them the opportunity to understand the audience. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to actually read out a few statements, and if you agree, I'd like you to raise your hands so that they know, what you think and what you don't really agree on. So statement 1, easy access to guns based on constitutional right is always more important than consequences such as violence, injuries, and deaths. If you agree, please raise your hand. Oh my God, we have liberals. Okay, the fact that there are enough guns in this country, as there are residents, actually makes this country safe. No hands? Not even one person agrees with that? All right. Okay. Third one, when a person survives a gunshot injury, he or she, after the acute stage, returns to normal life and leads a life without any residual ill effects. And you wonder why there is no research or no programs for those people. Okay, so fourth one, gun violence problem in this country can be effectively reduced by implementation of comprehensive background check laws. Do you actually believe that? Okay, there you go. There are people who believe in laws. The federal and state governments are doing quite well in reducing mass shootings and school shootings. Who agrees on that? Not doing well? All right. After a person dies of gun violence, there are adequate government resources for the loved ones to recover and heal. Do you agree, or you just don't know? Who don't know about it? Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you're a gun owner or you live in a household where someone owns a gun. All righty. You? No? So please raise your hands if you've ever been shot with a gun or know a person who has been shot. All right, someone take a picture. All right, I'll introduce the topic areas of all the speakers here, and they're going to give us an 8-minute talk each. So Thea James will start first, and Thea will speak about healthcare providers' perspective on treating those affected by violence based on trauma-informed care, social determinants of health related to violence, and how to affect societal and individual change by removing the stigma surrounding violence. You can go ahead, Thea.
Pardon? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh,
You
just
wanna
start
come up
here?
here,
Oh,
or you
that's
can
right.
just speak?
No. Thank you. I don't want to do that. That's great. Thank you so much. So I'm actually happy to be able to sit here. I have some notes because I think the best time, first of all, I'm timing myself. It's going to be a challenge, but I'm going to challenge myself. It's best for me to address what Bindu just said based on personal experience as an emergency medicine physician. And the thing I learned at some point was that in order for me to be able to do the work of having colleagues and directing a violence intervention advocacy program, I would have to find a peaceful space that would enable me to do this work continuously. And I found the peaceful space when I decided the only way that I could do this work continuously would be to be true to myself, true to my patients, and true to my colleagues. And my journey to finding that peaceful space started a long time ago. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and it started with me doing residency training, and then years of being an emergency medicine physician long before we ever had a violence intervention program. And emergency medicine is a little bit like, I love emergency medicine. It's a little bit like speed dating of medicine. It's like, but with far better outcomes. You meet different people every 15 minutes or so, and you have very little time to establish a rapport and gain the patient's trust. But you have an opportunity to change their perspective, especially when they come in sad or angry or feeling hopeless and that type of thing. And through like thoughtful engagement and sincere engagement, you can shift that perspective to one of hopefulness and hope in some kind of a way, some kind of forward hope and possibility. And so, I feel like as an emergency medicine physician, it actually gives me a unique glimpse into human nature, the human condition, and all of what constitutes life, essentially. And so, when you see relief in people's eyes, it's really rewarding. And it's actually priceless, but it doesn't always happen that way. So sometimes I'm working in the emergency department, and I will hear like the scratchy, the radio will go off, and I'll hear the scratchy message from a paramedic coming across to alert us that they are en route with a gunshot victim. And then right after that, I'll hear an ambulance siren in the distance, but it's getting closer and closer. And then sometimes they'll arrive with a young person who, when they roll them in the trauma room, their eyes will be darting around the room in the chaos of the moment, scanning all the people in the room, and then their eyes are like lock on you. They see you and they lock on you, and then their eyes sort of just like follow you the entire time you're in the room. They keep returning to you and locking on you. And in those moments, I would always I'd feel a sense of deep sort of connection to that person, that young person at that point. And I would feel a sense of responsibility for what happens beyond that moment, if, I'd actually be given the opportunity to do so. But sometimes they arrive in the room and they're gray and they're ashen, and their eyes might be rolling in the back of their head. They might be sweaty, with like pale lips and gums and white fingernails. And that's a sign, that's shock actually, and it's a sign that they're losing blood really, really quickly. And sometimes before you roll them out the room and they're headed to the operating room, they might open their eyes if they're able to speak, and for just a minute might look up at you and ask you, am I going to die? And in those moments, you know, you're trying to like calm your heart, at least I was, calming my heart, calming my soul, trying to prepare myself for the walk to the family room. The family room where when you enter the room, everyone in the room plants their eyes on you and they're hanging on to every word you say. And in those moments, you give of your entire self to them, whatever they need in that moment, because you can't bear to witness their grief, their pain, their disbelief, and their helplessness. But you are there. And then after that, you know, you're sort of expected to return to baseline somehow so that you can you finish the rest of your shift and be fully present for your patients. And then sometimes right after that, you will hear these sort of negative comments and creative narratives about the patient, like who they were and what kind of life they lived. And this is coming from people who do not know them. They don't know them at all, but they just create these narratives about them. And but they create this it's a stigma based upon the nature of their injury. And sometimes I would just ask people, hey, where did that information come from? Or how did you find out about that? You know, just to sort of get them to try to reflect a little bit about what they're, you know, what they're saying. So when, I knew I was affected by these things. I didn't try to pretend that I wasn't affected by it. I knew that I was, because I'd feel really, really sad. And I would read and remember their tattoos, because they provided so much insight and it highlighted their trauma. The tattoos actually like translated to cries for help. And to me, it felt like, it's sort of like that medieval trumpet, you know, their tattoos sort of like clarioned their tenacity for survival as well. And so when the mayor came to us and asked us to start a program several years ago, it was very, you know, I didn't know what we would do, where we would even begin. But there are a couple of things I knew for sure. I knew that I would be true to my patients and their families, because they had been my teachers. And I knew that I would be true to myself. And second, I knew that our program would have, the tenets of our program would be fidelity and setting a very high bar for our patients who later become our clients along the continuum of care. We wouldn't let anybody else set the bar for them. And our, you know, and you know, trying to create structure took some time, but listening to the case presentations every week, you're hearing the histories of the lives of these young people, gave us direction. And we decided that we would use a model of intervention that is used by people everywhere, all over the world, including here. So there would be, the model would be, there would be caring, reliable adults who would be mentors and would provide life skills training. There would be opportunities for housing, education. These adults would also help them with job skills, and there'd be opportunities for employment and economic stability. And it works. Now, just like in the most stable of households, sometimes you don't achieve the intended outcome, but it is the model that people use to create people who are stable, productive citizens in society. And that's the model we use to this day. I just want to say one last thing. You know, for people who don't understand things like social determinants of health, you know, and don't understand and how those things impact people's lives and their ability to evolve fully in the ways in which they are able. I think if people knew things like that, they would have different perspectives. At least I would hope so. And if they understood trauma-informed care, you know, which is understanding what the manifestations of trauma are. So for a person, for example, who gets injured by a gunshot wound and is hospitalized and on any given day might be hiding under the sheet and not wanting to participate in physical therapy, that they would not be deemed uncooperative and not wanting to participate in their care, but in fact, this is a manifestation of trauma. And when people come in with car accidents and things like that, and they demonstrate the same behavior, it's automatically understood that it's a manifestation of trauma. And one last thing I would like to say is, something that happens even in hospitals, these types of injuries uncover a lot of things that are painful to see. You know, biases, you know, implicit bias, explicit bias, you know, there's racism, all kinds of things that show up. And people don't, it's not, you know, people, I don't think people intend for it to happen that way, but it's unconscious in some ways. For example, if you are limited to a certain number of visitors as a patient who is, everyone who's on the protected list has a limited number of visitors, for safety reasons, obviously. But if you are of a majority race and the same injury happens to you, then your list is extended. I mean, you have to wonder how people who witness that internalize that, you know, when they see that sort of, you know, power and privilege and what that makes them feel like and how demeaning that is for them. So we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to educate. Again, I totally give people the benefit of the doubt because we all don't know what we don't know. But I feel like we have to get busy and take care of this because it causes more harm than good.
Thank you, Thea.
Thank you.
So Carlos will speak to us about the aftermath of gun injury and the trauma that remains in the people and the communities. And he's going to do a comparison of this kind of trauma in the U.S. and in Guatemala. Would you like to come up here,
Yeah,
Carlos?
I'll come up.
Yes.
Yeah.
You guys could come up and sit if you like. So, you know, just speaking of social determinants of health, which is a big word for me, and environment and neighborhood, and you know, why would a neighborhood determine your upper mobility and your status in the world and in life? Is kind of the reason why I started working on this project. Can we get the lights dimmed down a little bit, just so you can see the slides a little better? And so, you know, I was affected by seeing, and you know, you don't know this when you're 16, 15, but seeing friends in school either shoot somebody or end up in jail for shooting somebody or were murdered. You know, there's a pair of twins that were running around the school, and one of them didn't show up the next school year. And so, you know, when you have friends that are bringing guns to school for protection, and there's gang fights outside of your school, you start kind of thinking about these things in a way that, like a survival type of mode way, and you don't really think about them until you become an adult and grow up. And so when I started taking pictures, I started thinking about this project about gun violence. And I lived in Philadelphia, got robbed at gunpoint, and it really made me think about what I needed to do as a photographer, as a visual communicator. And I came back to Chicago and I started photographing the neighborhoods on the south and west side where these things were taking place, where young people were getting murdered a lot. And so I started knocking on doors and asking families and asking if I can have permission to document their lives, what they're going through. This photograph here was in outside of Englewood, in a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, and you see a lot of lights. Actually, it was kind of a mistake, but sometimes the neighborhoods are overexposed and sometimes they're underexposed. And in this case, it was overexposed. The police brought out a bunch of lights to search for bullets, and the detectives came out and yada, 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 because it was a young girl that was killed, and they knew that the press was going to pay attention to it. And when young brothers, black and brown brothers are killed in these neighborhoods, and they're a little older, maybe 15, 16, 17, the attention is not paid. The attention that this case had is not an alarming attention. Excuse me, I'm not expressing myself. It's been a long day. But as I knocked on doors, there was a story that where I started my project. There was a story about Sarita and Stuckey Reed. And Sarita was a young girl. She was 14 years old, getting ready to go to school. And there was a shooting down the block. The guy was shooting an AK off, and the bullet from the AK pierced the window, just like any other girl would get ready to go to school, or any other boy in America. And she was shot and killed. And then another young girl, her name was Sarita White. She was killed at a birthday party just a week later. And the effect of this was two families that knew each other, two mothers that grew up with each other, next door to each other, ended up having the same tragedy days later from each other. So this is a year later, after I spent a year with the family, photographing them. And right away, Sarita's mother said to me, "Baby, I want you to do something for me. I want you to come over and just hang out." And she let me document her life as she was going through the process of losing her child, burying her child. And so, all the crimes that take place in Chicago are not just the South Side. This is blocks from the mayor's house, Rahm Emanuel's house. Sometimes it's blocks away from Barack Obama's house. Sometimes it's blocks away from my house. And so what I wanted to do with the project, this is like a short version of it. I wanted to really get a sense of not just witnessing gun violence, but also witnessing the trauma of having your neighborhood blocked off by police tape, your environment stopped, young people like on the lead being injured that were able-bodied. 2 weeks before they were shot and had strength, and he was on the swim team. And now he's shot and paralyzed at the age of 14 with a C4 injury. And he can't walk again, and the doctors tell him that he'll never be able to move. But his mother's so resilient, and he's so resilient that 5 years later, he's getting up and walking and going to school and going to prom. And the boys on the block are going back to doing what they do, is play. And you see memorials in street corners. And the young brothers that might be out of the system, the work system, the part of the being able to not check off a box because they got caught with a bag of weed or maybe with a gun for protection, and now they're out of the system. They can't get jobs because they have to check off boxes, right? So the neighborhood is just like you're kind of in this mode where you can't move and you can't go one way or the other. And it's kind of like the dollar in the photograph that's just hanging. Which way do you go, left or right? Then I forgot this man's name, but he spent like 20 years in jail, the man with the beer. And he was innocent. He spent his whole life almost incarcerated. And when he came out, he told me he played blues in jail, but he told me that he wanted to reconcile everything that happened to him. And you get these kind of like statements from people like Rudy Giuliani, for example, when he was in an interview talking to Michael Eric Dyson about, people in black and brown neighborhoods they don't protest these things, and they don't come out and scream and holler and yell about what's happening. And it's not true, It's not true. I have evidence of it, that people in the neighborhood don't want these things to happen. And him and Michael Eric Dyson went back and forth. But one thing I wanted to do with the project is really break these myths of what was happening, what you think the neighborhoods are like, because you've never been there, you never stepped foot in it. And then the father, the priest who takes in the brothers who had a history of being in gangs, but they're coming back to the neighborhood to do right and help out. And Andali going to prom because he promised himself that he wanted to do that. And then the celebration really of families coming together for block parties to celebrate life in their neighborhood and make sure that young folks have a place to play. And that's one of the traditions of Chicago is block parties. And thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. You want to come back up here? Now, Mark will educate us regarding primary gun violence prevention by actually directly training the students, parents, and teachers to identify signs of isolation and to be upstanders and to look out for peers who might be at risk of self-harm. So, Mark, would you like to come up here, or would you rather speak from there?
This is fine here, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming, and I apologize that I'm late, but I'm glad I got here when I did to hear those powerful remarks. So my wife Jackie is a school teacher. She had been teaching in the Bronx for many years, and I'm a musician, professional guitar player, fortunate enough to make my living doing what I love to do. And we moved to Newtown, Connecticut to raise our three beautiful children, James, Natalie, and Daniel. School system was good, and we could barely afford our lifestyle, but as a school teacher, Jackie would work during the day, and I would write music during the day from home, and then I'd perform at night, so we were able to be with our kids around the clock. We were barely making it financially, but it was the way we wanted to do it, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything. And that's where I'd like to end my story and just say thanks so much and listen to John or somebody else speak. But as it is, it didn't stay that way. On the morning of December 14th, 2012, it was pretty routine in that I was on duty to walk the kids to the school bus. And they were on 3 different buses because they were in 3 different schools. James was in middle school, Natalie was in intermediate school, and Daniel was in elementary school. And something different happened that morning in that Daniel got up before he ever did. He got up, he had never been up this early and outside, but I was walking James to the bus at 6:25, and we hear little footsteps behind us, and it was Daniel who had gotten himself up. And I said, "What are you doing up and out of bed?" And Daniel said, "Can I come to the bus with you guys so I can hug James and kiss him and tell him I love him?" And I thought, okay, it's about 15 degrees and you're out here in your pajamas, but how do I say no to that? So I put him on my shoulders and we walked James up to the bus and he gave him a beautiful hug and told him he loved him. And Daniel and I walked back into the house and I said, "You know, it's still dark. We can go back to bed if you have time. Your bus doesn't come till 8:30. And he said, "No, Daddy, this gives us time for cuddling." So we had just gotten our Christmas tree the weekend before. We turned on the Christmas tree, and Daniel looks out the window and he says, "Look at how beautiful the sunrise is this morning." And I thought, you know, you're right, Daniel. And I went and got the camera. And he says to me when I come back with the camera, he said, "And if you look just right, you can see the reflection of our Christmas tree lights with the beautiful sunrise. It's going to be a beautiful day." And I said, "Yeah, you're right." And I'm thinking, what 7-year-old kid thinks like this? So I take the picture of this beautiful sunrise with the Christmas tree lights and reflecting in the window. And we get Natalie up, and Daniel had to walk Natalie to the bus and tell her that he loved her. And at 8:30, it was time to walk Daniel to the bus, and I put him on the bus. And I came back into the house, and I was working on a recording project for somebody. And I started getting text messages, and and emails and phone calls that there was a lockdown in our district. And especially now, unfortunately, we know about lockdowns. But even then, it was, I didn't think there was anything serious about it, but just a lockdown or a drill. And then I get a phone call, do you know what's going on at the school? Apparently there's a report of a shooting. And I'm like, oh my God, what do you mean? So I fly down to Sandy Hook Elementary School, which is down a little wooded lane from a firehouse, and a school that I've been to dozens of times because James and Natalie had also gone to this elementary school, and because of the nature of my work, I was home and available to go do reading and volunteer projects at the school. I was there all the time. And what I arrived upon was something that I still to this day cannot fathom. But this scene of more emergency vehicles and personnel, this very real, palpable state of emergency at this little elementary school down this wooded country lane, and trying to get my head wrapped around this, and very little information at the time, but as the hours go by, they're gathering the kids up into the firehouse, and they're holding up signs. They're lining up by grade. I'm looking for first grade. I'm looking for my little Daniel. And then we get this report that there's a report coming from the school that maybe the principal had been shot and maybe killed. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, how am I going to explain this to Daniel? Little Daniel was just a fountain of compassion and awareness of others. This was a kid that would pick up worms off the sidewalk and put them in the grass so they didn't burn in the sun. He insisted that we were all seated at the table before anybody could start eating dinner. He would hold doors open for strangers, constantly looking out for other people. His teachers would tell us at every single parent-teacher conference, if Daniel sees somebody sitting alone, he wants to make sure they're okay and will ask to be excused from an activity to go sit with them. And as a parent, you love hearing that stuff, that they're being a good citizen on their own out there in the world. And so here I am at the firehouse down the just across the parking lot pretty much from the school, trying to figure out how am I going to explain this to this sweet, compassionate little boy. And sometime after that, they gathered all the remaining families into a room, and they said, if you have not been reunited with your loved one yet, the fact is that a gunman has shot his way into Sandy Hook Elementary School and shot and killed 6 teachers and 20 first grade children. And one of those little children was our sweet little Daniel. And that's why I want to finish my story with I play guitar and walk out of the room. And as I sit here almost 5 years from that day telling you this story, I just know that I will never get used to this. I will never. And Jackie grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in Yonkers. We've been held up at gunpoint in Nashville, Tennessee. Jackie had to get off her front steps because there was a gunfight happening right in front of her. And never during that time did we ever think this is not going to fix itself and we have to do something about it. But here we were, and here I am still trying to contemplate this whole idea that my 7-year-old was shot to death in his first grade classroom. And I'm never going to get used to saying that. And I wouldn't wish on anybody the task that followed that day, which was to gather up James and Natalie and tell them what happened. These are 3 kids that used to spend every waking moment together, and 3 kids that would sleep in the same bed together out of choice because they always wanted to be together. And to have to sit James and Natalie down that night and tell them what happened is something I wouldn't wish on anybody ever. It's something that nobody should have to do. And then to try to answer the questions that came in the days and the weeks after that, like, how could this happen? Why would somebody do something like this? And we all know, everybody in this room, you're professionals, you know that this is happening every day. Mass shootings in a school is not every day, but people are losing loved ones to gun-related tragedies every single day in this country. 32,000 people a year, every single year in this country. And so we didn't know how to answer those questions that James and Natalie were asking about how this happened to their little brother. And so that's why I got together with some other family members who had also lost loved ones in that tragedy, and some members of our community, to try to at least address those questions, and more importantly, to try to prevent this from ever happening to anyone again, so that none of you have to have that conversation with your children. And so maybe you won't find so many families to go document as they travel this journey of trying to wrap their head around losing a loved one to gun violence. And so that's where we started our organization, which we call Sandy Hook Promise. And just the name is very literal to me, is that I have decided to make a promise to myself, to my surviving children, to your children, and to honor my little Daniel, to do everything in my power to prevent this from happening again. And so Sandy Hook Promise is now a national, nonprofit gun violence prevention organization. We are now in all 50 states. And we are working in a lot of different areas, some in policy and legislation, but more in prevention. This whole idea of prevention through identification and intervention. There's a lot of good organizations doing great work in the policy space. And we didn't want to duplicate that great work. We wanted to find a vacuum. We wanted to find something else, maybe that somebody wasn't addressing, and maybe we could work there. So we realized that nobody's working in this space of prevention. So we have developed 4 programs that we can bring into schools and communities and youth-serving organizations around the country for free. They address social isolation. They address good upstander behavior. We have a suicide, signs of suicide program and an intervention program for adults and teachers. So start with hello. It trains kids how to recognize those kids who are always sitting alone, who are always left out, chronically socially isolated, and include them. The guy that killed my little boy was chronically socially isolated. And if maybe somebody like my little Daniel had had one more conversation with him, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So we're training kids to do that, to notice those kids and reach out to them. Say Something is a program that trains kids how to look for language in social media, to listen to conversations in the lunchroom and on the school bus, and listen for kids talking about hurting themselves or hurting somebody else, and then connect that kid to a trusted adult who can help them. We have now developed an anonymous reporting system that kids can put on their phone, so they don't have to worry about the stigma of being a snitch or a rat, and they can get that person the help that they need before it becomes a tragedy. Signs of Suicide is for the adults and the teachers, and safety assessment and intervention is also for the adults and teachers. We have now trained 2 million children and adults, and we are on track to train 2 million more under this whole idea of know the signs. And we're doing it all for free, thanks to the generosity of our donors. And so that is how I am continuing. That is how I get up in the morning and I honor my little son. And I hope that you guys will come find us at sandyhookpromise.org and see if there's some little way that you can help. Thank you.
Tina is going to talk to us about how she's transforming the society's response to homicide. She's going to speak about her personal experience and also how to be coordinated, consistent, and compassionate in our responses to homicide.
Thank you. What an honor, truly an honor it is to stand here with you and to be here with you. My heart is filled. I'm overflowing with emotions, yet I am filled with hope. My story begins in 1993. 15-year-old Lewis Brown. He was an excellent student, and he had big dreams. He wanted to get a PhD in aerodynamic engineer, and he wanted to become the first African-American president of the United States. I don't know how much you remember about the early 1990s. They were a particular violent times in the city of Boston. And Lewis at that time was very concerned about other young people and the violence that was going on in his neighborhood. He was also frustrated that he and his friends would always be blamed about the violence that was happening. Every time something good happens, adults, politicians, religious leaders would take the credit. Every time something happened, what is happening with these youth? They don't seem to care anymore. He did not appreciate how him and his peers were blamed, especially those of us that live in Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. Lewis believed that all young people had the potential to be peacemakers, regardless of which side of the streets they came from. He was active in our community. He was committed to working for peace and justice. And he was concerned that unless inequity and unfairness was addressed, too many of his peers would either be dead, addicted to drugs, or in jail. December 20th of 1993, 5 days before Christmas, Lewis was caught in the crossfire of a shootout. He was my oldest son. When my family and I went to then Boston City Hospital, we were told that Lewis was brain dead. When I saw Lewis lying there, I didn't want to believe it was him. That couldn't be my son. When I lifted the sheet, I saw his distinctive feet. That young black child laying there was indeed my oldest son. All I knew about being brain dead was what I heard and saw on television. Yet that day, I fell to the floor. I felt the ground fall under my feet. It felt like I was floating on air. I couldn't catch my breath. The doctors didn't have any more information or instructions for me. My family and I left the hospital empty-handed, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. See, at that time, early 90s, there were no resources for families of murdered victims, especially families whose young black and brown boys were killed on the streets of Boston, especially if you look like me. When I returned home, my house was surrounded with media. It was the murder of the day. The media was speculating about who Lewis was. You see, in 1993, Lewis was the 98th homicide victim in the city of Boston. And the questions came, was he in a gang? Was it a drug deal gone bad? Did he just come out of the Department of Youth Services? See, before then, those are the questions I used to ask whenever the news reported that a young black child was killed on the streets. When the report happened that it was a drug deal gone bad, they were known to the police, I exhaled because I realized that could never happen to me. Yet it did. Once the media found out that Lewis was an honor roll student, that's when the narrative shifted and the resources started to flow for me and my family. I'm grateful for the support that we received, yet I wondered what would have happened if Lewis was indeed in a gang. What would have happened if Lewis did come out of the Department of Youth Services? Where would my family be, and where would my two younger children be? I knew that if Lewis did have a criminal record, I would not be standing here with you today. Yet, because of who Lewis was, because of the love of my living children and the love of my community, I know that his life could not end on the streets of Dorchester. So the way I dealt with my grief, the way I channel my pain and anger, I founded the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. Our goals were simple. One, I did not want to focus on guns, gangs, and give a black child a job. We started the Peace Institute with 3 goals in mind: to teach the value of peace, to focus on the assets of my community, and to transform the way society responds to homicide. Over the past 23 years, the Peace Institute has developed the best practices for serving families of murdered victims. From my personal experience as a survivor and my professional expertise as a provider, I know that the key part of violence prevention, research tells us, is how we respond to families impacted by violence. I experienced that myself when I left the hospital after Louis was killed. You see, I didn't know that the organ donor bank would call me at 12 o'clock to ask me to donate Louis's organ. I didn't know what services were available to help my 2 living children cope with the murder of their brother. Now, the advocates of the Peace Institute are there to support families through the funeral and burial process. We have developed partnership with the Boston Police Department Homicide Unit, the Boston Public Health Commissions, where they refer families in that first 24 to 72 hours, where we offer practical, emotional, and financial support. And we've developed the first ever Survivors Burial and Resource Guide, a step-by-step workbook for regaining control. Today, 3 of our major trauma hospitals have purchased the guide. So when a gunshot victim goes in and upon their demise, that family will not leave that hospital empty-handed the way I did. Boston Medical Center, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and Brigham and Women's Hospital have all the burial guide with them. I want to end just by saying, but while we do noble and worthy work reforming gun laws and addressing the flow of guns into our community, we have to recognize that homicides continues to happen every single day. We see it at the national and international level. It happens in our own backyard every single day, where Dr. James and her teams see it every single day. Yet we know that families on both sides of homicide undergo physical, emotional, and financial stress, and that can stabilize entire communities and fuel cycles of violence and poverty. There are solutions we can put in place to meet families' practical, emotional, and financial needs. As advocates, providers, researchers, and educators, we need to push our elected officials to have coordinated, consistent, and compassionate response to homicide. Since Louis was killed, there have been an additional 3,600 homicides. The number I want to work with you is the survivors of murdered victims. Research tells us that for one victim, there are at least 10 immediate family members that are impacted by that one homicide. And these numbers do not include friends, classmates, co-workers, neighbors, nor do these numbers include families on the other side of homicide, the shooters. We need a broader view on what prevention means. At the root of violence is inequity and oppression. To achieve true peace, we are called to do the internal and collective work of addressing racism. Homicide is a public health issue, and it is time we treat it that way. I am honored, I'm glad to be here at the BU School of Public Health and with all of you, and a shared understanding, again, that homicide is a public health issue. Addressing the impact of homicide requires a significant investment, yet not addressing it is even more expensive. There is a place for all of us in creating an environment where all people can live in peace, and an environment where Black lives really do matter. In unity, there is healing. Thank you. for allowing me to be here with you.
Thank you, Tina. And now we have John, and he's going to inform us on how to help change certain bad public health policy to good public health policy, and therefore produce good health outcomes. He will also discuss on how he manages being a gun owner and still focus on helping victims of gun violence. John, are you going to sit there or come?
No, I'll get up. Because I'm mostly here because I'm a restless malcontent. And I manage that process by trying to fight injustice. So my story really begins with the fact that with my last name, I wasn't born in Nazi Germany and never had a shot at making a difference. So I learned early in life, do something with your good fortune. I've certainly experienced with my last name, my fair share of hate and anti-Semitism and violence. And I grew up in a great home in a great community. So I just decided to try to do something with my good fortune, and I'll never forget, I think it was 1993 as well, when I read that that the Murray office building in Oklahoma City was blown up by an espoused a GI, a veteran, espoused NRA member who said he did it because the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the FBI were in that building, and they were responsible for starting a fire at Waco, Texas, where a pedophile with 50 caliber weapons and 80 kids who he was abusing died in a fire as a result of the FBI and ATF. And 168 people were killed. There was a daycare center in that building. And it just didn't seem possible to me that that's how far we had come in a country like ours, where our public servants are attacked and blown up for simply trying to regulate a consumer product like firearms and stop pedophiles. So then that opened my eyes. I was a gun owner at the time. I've been a gun owner my whole adult life. I skeet shoot. I have shotguns. And I am very aware of what a huge responsibility it is to have a firearm in the home. If I had children, I never would take that chance. But I had no idea what I was getting into when I decided to look into the gun issue. And I happened to own a parking garage on the Massachusetts Turnpike next to Fenway Park that had 300 feet of frontage. And the more I looked into the gun issue, it was surreal. I realized that there's no criminal background check requirement for gun sales in 33 states, including Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. I learned that 106 Americans died each and every single day in this country in 1994. I learned that more Americans died from gun violence over the last 40 years than all U.S. service men and women killed in all foreign wars combined. I learned that we give law enforcement 13 to 17 rounds in their service weapons and ask them to protect us when Congress says it's perfectly fine for criminals and dangerously mentally ill people and even international terrorist groups who come to this country to buy weapons undetected at 5,000 gun shows and in 33 states, cash and carry with no detection. Bad public policy leading to bad public health outcomes. And, you know, being a restless malcontent, I decided I was going to try to do something about it. So we built a 250-foot billboard in the Mass Pike, put up 15 beautiful color photographs of kids killed by guns, including Lewis. And that's when Tina and I met. And then we filed legislation, and we advocated for that legislation. And now, 20-some years later, Massachusetts has the lowest rate of gun death in the nation. We're an urban industrial state. And we have reduced the rate of gun deaths by 60% in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts by requiring accountability and responsibility on the part of gun owners like me to lock guns unless they're in our direct control. Gun dealers have to operate out of a bona fide store separate from their home backpack or kitchen table, which is perfectly legal in every other state. We became the first state in the nation to regulate firearms like the dangerous, inherently dangerous consumer product that they are. I mean, think about what you have for automobiles and the fact that we have dramatically reduced injuries and deaths from automobiles. We require training, licensing, safety features. In fact, you could even sue the automakers for not putting seat belts or other safety features in their cars. Well, you could argue that firearms are more inherently dangerous and easily concealable than automobiles. There not only are no background check requirements, there's no consumer protection standards for this inherently dangerous product. There are for toy guns, there are for teddy bears. I mean, the little red dot at the end of a barrel of a plastic toy gun is a federal law. You can't sell it without it. Yet 100 more people will die today from firearms, and there's no consumer protection standards, no safety features. And in fact, Congress has even given immunity to the gun industry so they can sell guns directly to criminals and not be held accountable. I don't know how else you could describe the fact that a .22 caliber handgun made by, it's an FN Herzl, it's made by a Austrian company, has been marketed as capable of penetrating 48 layers of soft body armor, legally marketed. Who wears soft body armor? The weapon that David Koresh used, a .50 caliber sniper rifle with a range of over a mile, he used to blow up an armored vehicle at Waco, which led to the fire, which led to the bombing, which led to you name it. That weapon is made by a Tennessee company. It is marketed as capable of taking down an aircraft with one shot, and they tell you where to put it. The company's called Barrett. You can go online. No marketing or manufacturing standards. And then I realized, how could this be? And it's not that dissimilar from the opioid epidemic. Guns have been unregulated for a very long time. And now we're all becoming intimately aware of race in politics and hate in politics. Folks, I mean, the majority of people never got involved in the gun violence because they said that's just inner city non-white kids killing each other. It became an epidemic when all of a sudden white kids in rural and suburban America were dying from firearm suicides, accidents, and now, you know, practically a daily mass shooting. Not real different than the politics around opioids. When it was just crack killing inner city black kids, no one cared. It became an epidemic when white kids were dying in suburban and rural America. Bad public policy leads to bad public health outcomes. And it is, you know, guns are the epitome. I mean, these are inherently dangerous products. They are made to kill. They are easily concealed. And because we think it's somebody else's problem, we do nothing. I don't know how Tina and Mark can do what they do. I mean, you know, it kills me every time listening to parents of dead children. I mean, we don't have the gene to bury our children and ever be the same. And not enough of us care, and not enough of us believe that it's our problem, which is why it is what it is today. I mean, we are a democracy, and you know, if you're lucky enough to live to be 90, that's 780,000 hours. That's all you get, folks. What you do with those hours is all that matters. Who you connect with is all that counts. And we don't have to live this way. But we do have to get involved locally, thinking globally before you lose a child. And I'm often asked, you know, is it going to get worse? Yeah, it's going to get a lot worse, folks. 2 years ago, you know, I mean, when we started this effort in '94, it was 40,000 Americans that year. You know, by '99, when Clinton left office and, you know, we had a ban on assault weapons, we had the Brady Bill background checks. I mean, we had the lowest rate of crime in recorded history. I mean, good public policy can lead to good public health outcomes. But we've gone way backwards since then. And don't fool yourself. This is being driven by an incredibly hate-filled, racist organization whose lifeblood is in the NRA, is to increase gun violence. And this is how it goes. Increase gun violence, increase fear, increase gun sales, and then hope for the high-profile mass shootings where gun sales spike. And I want to just, you know, I know that's an outrageous statement to say, but I want to read a quote from an NRA spokesman, just because you need to know it's not just me saying this. According to NRA board member Jeff Cooper, for example, urban gun violence can actually be a good thing, he said. He wrote this in Guns and Ammo. The consensus is that no more than 5 to 10 people in 100 who die by gunfire in Los Angeles, or you put in any urban area, is any loss to society. These people fight small wars amongst themselves. It would seem a valid social service to keep them well supplied with ammunition. That is the same NRA that posted my face along with 11 other guys or people with Jewish last names saying Jews are responsible for gun control. We should put them down. We should put them down. And this is NRA board member recently, Ted Nugent. So when you have an organization like that whose goal is to make sure that the gun industry can sell as many guns, they are perfectly happy to see inner city black kids killing inner city black kids. Guess what? Because while we slept, gun violence is now an epidemic in the entire country. It's because we're not holding our elected officials accountable. So it's a long way of saying we can have an impact on this. And in Massachusetts, we're an urban state. We simply hold gun owners, dealers, manufacturers, and law enforcement accountable. We banned assault weapons and large capacity ammunition magazines, which outgun cops. And we have reduced the rate of gun deaths by 60%. We're an urban state. It's a model for the country. It is totally doable. But it's not going to happen without people getting involved. And we're among the lucky ones. So do something with your hours and your minutes. Hold Congress accountable. Hold the White House accountable. And what's going to happen is there's going to be, look, at Aurora, Colorado, a made in Massachusetts AR-15 by Smith & Wesson in Springfield, Mass. Was used to shoot 71 people in a movie theater, and nothing happened. Nothing. Virginia Tech, 32 killed, 51 shot. Nothing happened in Congress. And believe it or not, when Daniel was killed at Sandy Hook, along with 19 other first graders, a lot of people thought it's finally going to happen. And guess what, folks? The U.S. Senate couldn't even. The bill got so watered down, it came down to requiring background checks on internet sales and at gun shows, and failed to pass. Forget the fact that started with an assault weapon ban and large capacity ammunition magazines. So What will happen is a mass shooting far worse than anything we've ever seen. It's going to take far more than 71 or 20 or 51. And we have got to do everything we can to prevent that while we hold our local, state legislators accountable like we did in Mass or anywhere else that you come from, because our day will come in Congress. But God help us, as far as between now and then. And it's places like this, thanks to people at VU School of Public Health and legislators, both Republican and Democrats in Massachusetts, that became leaders. It's doable. But it means we got to put down our iPhones and spend a little time with each other and sacrifice some time at the State House and go to Washington in March and make gun violence, which will kill 100 more people today, a priority before that horrific mass shooting happens that hopefully will begin to change the tide in Congress. But until then, we've got to do it at the state level, and Massachusetts has proven it's possible. So thank you.
So thank you, all of you, for, I don't know, I'm a little bit, this is hard. But before we ask questions to a panel, I need to let you know a few things. We need to be asking bold and uncomfortable questions, but we have got to do that in a civil manner. So panel members, please feel to disagree vehemently or agree wholeheartedly. And we will start the questions based on a mutual understanding of both civility and truthfulness. So we're going to open up for questions. And if you do have questions, please stand up and ask the questions. Introduce yourself first and ask your specific question specific to whichever panel, the speakers you want them to get your answer from. So who's going to go first? Otherwise, I have something to ask Tina directly. Yes.
It's probably the last speaker because it's a slightly question about what's being done. One of the things I didn't hear addressed today was the issue of domestic violence and its relationship with firearm deaths. I lost a friend of mine in the mass shooting outside of Dallas just under 3 weeks ago. 5 of the 8 victims were from my undergraduate university. They were alumni there. And it came out that it was due to that the host of the football game party had recently separated from her husband. Is there? I know there's. I hear that work doing for issues of racism and poverty is being addressed. This is, I guess, a gender, often a gender issue of domestic violence. Is there work currently going on to, like, we mentioned background checks before, but that seems to be what you can do.
There absolutely is. In fact, in Massachusetts right now, there is a bill that is before the legislature for extreme protective orders, so a family member or loved one can actually petition the court to have a gun removed from the home, even if they haven't been adjudicated, or a prohibited gun owner. So several states are doing that. I mean, if you look at the numbers, most people that die from homicide are known to each other. Oftentimes, and a gun in the home is far more likely to be used against someone that you love, or in a suicide, than an intruder. And the numbers are staggering historically over that stuff. So, an argument often can turn into a homicide when there isn't a gun. It's a fight. So yeah, it's a huge issue, and it is one that is up front and center in the Massachusetts State House. So I encourage you to call the House Speaker and the Senate President and the Governor and encourage them to enact that legislation. It does help save lives. There's no question about it.
Yes, please. Yes.
Hi, my name is Melanie. Hello. Oh, my name is Melanie. I'm currently a first-year student in the MPH program here. I was actually born and raised in Sandy Hook, and I went to Sandy Hook Elementary School, so it's super personal for me. But this question's actually directed for Thea. Am I saying that right? And I'm curious about, after people are shot, they have to deal with a lot of complications. Sometimes they're in a wheelchair for their whole life. There's a lot of trauma that communities and individuals have to go through. And if there are services that are in place for these people, and if there are, what kind of resources and ways can they get access to help in those areas?
Sure. Well, interestingly enough, as I said, we, in our program, or maybe I didn't, but at our program, the services begin at the bedside. We work with a trauma surgery department behavioral health team. So things begin then, and we sort of assess what will be needed going forward. The first set of services that are needed after discharge, often, they encounter barriers right there. For example, if they are, in fact, in a wheelchair and they have a spinal cord injury and they have to go to a rehabilitation center, often they're turned away from many, and a lot of it's based on the fact that they're a gunshot victim. And, what some of these places will say, there is a safety sort of issue. So that's one barrier. And I think that what is often missed in that space right off the bat is, particularly for people who have had a lifetime of trauma, that what's being reinscribed is what they've experienced their whole life. Like they don't matter and people don't care about them. And so when you're already a victim and you're a spinal cord victim, and then you get that kind of rejection, you can imagine, the impact that has on a person. And so our team works with other people beyond that who can sometimes outfit a person's house where they'll be going to, with the sort of things that people who are handicapped or disabled might need, in order to be able to move around and be mobile and that type thing. So those services, are out there. Those services are there, and we work with people long after they're actually discharged from the hospital. So the services, generally are out there, but they're not always easy to get. And the thing about the rehabilitation centers, they determine what your functionality is going to be like, and it's much needed in terms of the sort of activities of daily living and that type thing that you need to be able to do. But if you can't get those things, it limits how well you will be able to heal and be functional beyond that. So there can be barriers all along the way.
So Thea, that will mean it all depends on the type of insurance they have. It's most likely to be Medicaid, and Medicaid would have a cap. So how do, you're talking about BMC, and you have this really nice organization to help them, but what happens in the other parts of the country where such kind of help is not readily available?
Well, I'm
particularly considering the cap, you
Sure.
can't go after certain dollars.
Well, we do have there's a national network of hospital-based violence intervention programs that they're disseminating pretty rapidly. And many of them are able to get the type of things that people need, but in those cities and states where these sort of resources are not available, this type of support is not available, those people, often don't do as well. I mean, for sure they don't do as well. And people are always trying to apply to belong to our network so that we can provide technical assistance and that type of thing to them so that they can develop these programs. We actually have a policy group, for example. We have research, policy, workforce, behavioral health, and now one called certification for people who actually do the work with victims after they're injured. But the policy group is working on things like making it so that the American College of Surgeons requires that these programs be in every level 1 trauma center, for example, in order to be accredited. And the certification group has been working to get these jobs certified, and so that people can actually, they can bill for those services and they can get paid and they can get certification for the job. Is the same as other, other roles, like similar to like domestic violence back when it was evolving in terms of programs for that, and like social work, or it's like a community health worker, that type thing. So we're trying to do more to make it available for more people.
Thank you. Sure. You have a question?
Hi, my name's Anisha. I'm actually from Texas, and I've lost friends to gun violence and misuse. I'm wondering, how can someone from Texas, because even in government debates, whenever people are running for government or local district positions, they don't talk about gun control. It's just not something that is spoken about because it's such an integral part of the culture there. So how does one kind of make that first step of, getting it talked about, because it's just not something that,
Well, do you want to?
Go ahead.
Sure. And then, so we started here by simply saying that your kids are going to homes where there are loaded and unlocked firearms. So it was a public service message around safe storage. So we were very clear not to say we want to ban guns, but we want to simply make them safer and reduce injuries and deaths from them. So when I would go around, we'd have house parties or other events and say to people, before you let your kids or grandkids play somewhere, ask the question. And it was amazing how many people came back to me and said, I had no idea there were guns in my neighbors' homes. And that started the conversation around safe storage. And then, we just went from that to talking about automobiles. And then you always get, oh, yeah, but automobiles aren't protected by the Second Amendment. Well, then you can, you go down this rat hole. But if you do a little bit of research, you quickly come down to what the Supreme Court said, which is you can put restrictions. You can't ban guns, but you can put reasonable restrictions on how they're sold. And Scalia wrote it. It's all there. So it's really about starting the conversation. But the majority, so just to give you a sense, there's about 80 million gun owners in this country, and there's about 3 to 4 million members of the NRA. The majority of gun owners do not subscribe to the extremism of the NRA. So don't give up just because somebody's a gun owner. I mean, they care about their kids as much as you and I do. And you may actually just get them going, geez, I should have a safe, or I should have a trigger lock, and I certainly, should not store my gun loaded. So, it's really just trying to reach people in a non-threatening way. But always saying, and I ran into so much resistance to this, you don't have to, you have to say, we're interested in reducing injuries and deaths from guns without banning them. And you're not, we're not trying to demonize people who are gun owners. We're never going to remove guns in this country, but we certainly can require accountability and responsibility, and most law-abiding gun owners know that and practice it. And so try to get out of the extremes and just talk about it on a level that they can relate to.
Carlos, do you want to add?
No, I mean, the only thing I guess I would add is just you have to really reach out to your peers, and they're the next voting block, and really kind of hit them over the head in a way, on how do we want to proceed? Because they're going to have children, and their friends are going to have children. So I think that's the part of this room that's important, is that how we want to proceed is the next generation, and you have the power to do that. And so you have to create a coalition. You're fighting a small group of people who are like pushing you around. I hate to be that bold, but You have to create a coalition of people who think like you to push your message forward.
Or join a coalition.
Or join a coalition.
You know, to John's point as well, just have those conversations. Encourage your family back in Texas to have those conversations. There are a lot of great organizations doing really good work in this space. Have them sign up, have a house party, have a table or a tent at a local event. Have the conversations. It needs to be a national conversation. We need to be talking about it.
And also, if I can add, if you've been impacted, your story. You know, getting the people that have been impacted. I think many times as survivors, you know, we're seen as angry, especially if you're a survivor of color. I'm seen as an angry black woman. Oh, hell yeah, I'm an angry black woman. Yet, how do I take that anger and channel it to make a difference? So really looking at your peers, if you've been impacted, go into those families, hearing what it is that they need. Because when we don't support those who have been impacted, that cycle of violence continues. Because it's easy access to gun. I want to equip myself because society has not been able to support and respond to me. So hurt people will hurt people. And if the easy access to gun is there, then that's where I'm going. And then we become the criminals that are being armed with guns because nobody has provided that support for us. So all of it is important. Don't forget if you have been impacted, because it is the rage, it is the anger that will fuel you and your peers to equip yourself with a gun, because society hasn't done as much to respond. So all of it together collectively. One way alone is one way alone. And then you get exhausted. You know, we've been at this. This was even before I was dealing with this. And 24 years later, we're sitting here. Sandy Hook, one of the safest places in this country. So the work continues. My generation, I'm done. There's a generation before me that's tired. Public health, you got to get off of. Right now, we see this as a criminal justice, where when we talk about guns in inner cities, more police, swifter prosecution, and longer prison sentence. And we're not addressing the other aspect of it. So it's a holistic approach. Public health, public safety, criminal justice, and then a spiritual awakeness. So one size doesn't fit all. It's the whole holistic approach. You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, please.
My name is Bill. I'm a journalist and a sometime teacher. And it strikes me that there's been a lot of good national and local reporting on opiates, for example, as well as gun violence, but leading to very little impact. And I just want to invite anyone on the panel to critique journalism's role in raising the kind of awareness that you've managed to do today. I wish this were a congressional hearing that people who vote were actually seeing. But what could be done better?
I'll take that quick. When I was covering, photographing these young lives in Chicago, the families, I would take this work. I had a body of work that I would take to solicit Time magazine, Newsweek when it existed, the local papers, the Tribune, and I would like say, hey, this is going on in Chicago. You know, kids are dying on the South Side, the West Side. I have this work. Why don't you publish it? And it was the room was silent. I never got a response. They would look at it. They would react. The editors would say, okay, that's fine. And as soon as Barack Obama became president, it became politicized. And I'm saying that, I'm using that as an example because it became this thing of like, oh my gosh, Chicago is, there's you know, 600 people dying, and what is Barack Obama doing about it? And I would see Barack Obama at a church when he was a senator talking to Sarita and Stuckey's mother, sitting next to the mothers, and you know, heard one of his most beautiful speeches on gun violence. And so it wasn't, the attention wasn't drawn to it then, but when Barack Obama became president, it became politicized, right? First African American president, you know, these black on black crime, you know. So now that opiates are a problem in white communities, you have, you know, someone that looks like your cousin, your niece, your nephew, and you're like, oh shit, we need to do something. And so when my children and my cousins and my sisters and my brothers are being murdered, I have a desperation to call attention to it because I don't hear anything about it. Now I stuck to it because I needed the evidence to show you that there's beautiful people in neighborhoods, and you create an archive and a place to have for the future for people to have something to look at. But I think we need also more journalists of color telling stories about their communities to have a balance of what these stories that we hear are, you know? So that, I think that's the part of the media that's if that was the question you really asked, that's the part of the media that's missing is having people that look like us in the room.
So
telling
I'd
stories.
love to help with that question too, because one of the ways that we made Massachusetts the leader in gun violence prevention was telling stories and partnering with the media. I mean, they have a big voice. And the Boston Globe was amazing. And WBUR and Anthony Brooks, who's in the audience, amazing, right here at BU. And they didn't let up. And they didn't just follow that old adage, if it bleeds, it leads, you know. And they followed the progress. And they reported on the issue over time. And yeah, it helped a lot that I was a gun owner and a business person with influence, access, and resources. But media people, you know, you don't have to, and Anthony and I talk about, I know how he feels as a parent. And he also happens to be an amazing reporter on the radio, NPR. And he manages to separate enough to not be called biased, but don't, especially now, we can't fall into the trap of the foxification and, you know, the fake news. I mean, the media have an enormous role, an enormous responsibility. It's hard to thread the needle, but without you, it's not going to happen.
I think if I can add, let's just call it race. We decide whose life is worthy. Again, when Lewis was killed, once they found out that he was not in a gang, that he was an honor student, they went to his school, they tried everything to find and to justify why a 15-year-old black child was killed at 3:15 in the afternoon going to a public station. Race. Also, finding ways when our elected officials, when people in power want to justify, this is a hot spot. These things happen. The kids are getting younger. There are too many guns. Yes, there are too many guns. But the question is, what is it that we are doing? What are elected officials doing? If you know there's a hot spot, what are we doing to cool it down? How can we invest in primary prevention? Research does say investing in upfront prevention will keep us from always responding to murder and to gun violence. So it's really the investment of the work. It's really looking at the journalism, the young generation. How do we value life? Whose life is worthy of? In my community, when something good happens, we have to send out God knows how many press releases and call and call. The minute a shooting happens, everybody is there without a press release. So how do we balance? Again, you've got, what do you call them? Weather reporters, you've got sports reporters, you've got even violence reporters. How do we get a peace reporter that really will invest in the goodness of communities, that really will invest in the primary prevention, the public health approach? How do we get you guys as reporters not to dismiss the criminal justice aspect of this work, not to dismiss the public safety aspect of this work? How do we balance the public health to this work? Because that's what happens is the competition also, where police and lawyers and prosecutors and prisons think public health is trying to take their money. And that's where the fight comes in. So as journalists, how do you go a little bit more deeper and look at what research tells us? If we really want to address the issue of violence, we will invest in upfront prevention. So let's look at race. Let's call it what it is. We know we don't want to talk about race, but let's call it what it is. When black people are being killed, when brown people are being killed, when non-white children are being killed, nobody cares, because the justification of they're killing each other, and as John read, and I want that, by the way, because I'm going to start using that. We know there's a recipe. We know there is. When someone says, as long as black kids continue to kill each other, it's money that we're making. So we look to you guys to shift the narrative.
And let me just also say that good news stories don't lead. That it's such a shame. It's a constant conversation I have with my friends in the media. And I was just having lunch today with our House Speaker, who was responsible for our most recent gun law. He didn't even know we had the lowest gun death rate in the nation here in his state that he contributed to, because the media doesn't talk about the good news. They typically talk about the bad news. So there's an opportunity for the media to start to spread some hope, even if it doesn't get ratings.
Since we're really talking about the media as a whole, right? So once Vice News contacted me and they said they want to do a documentary on gun violence. And what they wanted me to participate in was, they wanted to show an urban setting, an ER where people are shot in there. And I was like, dude, this is not going to work. And we had to pull away. So I don't know. Is it the whole horror? All they want to show, and honestly, after that, I stopped talking to the media. I get an email, go delete. That's it. And it's because of that whole thing about, making people this horror, inciting horror. And then what happens is we just become numb towards the whole experience.
Don't give up on the media.
Yeah, well, I like to think not to give up on the media, but I'm halfway there. And as a moderator, I should probably not say that. But someone's standing there and telling me that we've got to stop. So I'm going to quickly, we had a few wrap-up discussion points, and I'm going to say, nope, we're going to drop that, and we're going to conclude with our panel members to provide us some of their predictions, either optimistic or just be pessimistic as you want, regarding the future of gun violence prevention and how, we can really partner, or can we partner with our, our journalist friends so that we can really tell the stories of gun violence and cause a social change. So let me start with Thea. Thea, are you optimistic about the future? Can we really do something, or you're just pessimistic like me?
Well, we can do something. There's no question about that. People are, I'm speaking from the perspective of the population of people that I interface with all the time. They are human. They're absolutely human. And so it's almost like, patients who have chronic diseases, when they come and see their doctor and they're like the diabetes or high blood pressure is always out of control, and the doctors say they're non-adherent, non-compliant, as if patients would rather be sick than well. And they sort of don't understand the sort of decision trees people have to make. If you have limited amount of resources and you have to make a decision between spending those resources on feeding your family or spending it on transportation to get to a doctor's appointment who doesn't understand you, or copay for a prescription, it's an easy, decision. It's a no-brainer. And so, nothing ever gets better because, the doctors don't understand them. And I think the same thing with a lot of young people who are in dire straits. They're hopeless. I mean, when they have tattoos that say, born to be hated, dying to be loved, and death is nothing but to live defeated is to die every day. I mean, they're like giving you all the signs of what the problems are and where the help is needed. And even the research, the research that does things like count, re-injury, level of education. I mean, as if you're setting the bar, you've already set the story. So we need like mixed methods sorts of things. So you have context for these crazy quantitative data. So I would say that, there is absolutely an opportunity to do this. In our violence program, we have tons of wonderful stories. We have housing track, we have employment track. We do all that. You can go from having a GED to an MBA. We do that. But I'm with the speaker down on the end there. I mean, I'm not so sure people want to see people do better. Right. Mm-hmm. So is it possible? Absolutely it's possible. But I'm not so sure, the will is there or the want is there for that to happen. So am I optimistic? I know for sure it can happen, but will it? I'm not so sure. So that's why every opportunity that we get, every person I interface with, the bar starts right here. Mm-hmm. The bar starts right here. So that's my response to that question.
Thank you. Mark, what do you think? What are your predictions for our future, for our gun violence prevention efforts?
Well, I feel encouraged. I will say I feel encouraged. The work that we're doing with Sandy Hook Promise, look, one common theme we keep hearing here is there's this complacency. People are not speaking up, that we need to have these conversations. You asked the question, how many hands went up when you said, how many of you have been directly impacted by gun violence? And almost all of the hands went up. So it's definitely touching us. It's definitely our issue. We need to be vocal about it being our issue. So we are doing that. That's kind of the strategy behind the strategy. I just told you we have trained now 2 million students and adults in our Know the Science programs, 4 of them. And we are on track to train 2 million more. We are now in Boston Public Schools. Hello, Boston. We are now in Chicago Public Schools. And so we are beginning to spread that message. We're giving people something to do. We're giving them a way to be involved. We are also working on policy. We're supporting the Extreme Risk Protection Order that we spoke about earlier. It's a targeted intervention for somebody who is ideating on self-harm or harming somebody else to temporarily store their firearms somewhere else until they're okay. We helped the federal government pass one of the most comprehensive mental health care packages legislation. President Obama signed that into law just before he left office. We're very proud about that. So I feel very encouraged that we are gaining momentum. We are gathering hearts and minds. We are influencing the majority. We're hoping to get more people into the vocal majority. And Daniel should have turned 12 yesterday. And we need your help. We need your voices. We need your advocacy. We need those conversations.
Carlos.
I'm completely optimistic. I think there's a shift in the people that are talking. Young folks like Black Lives Matter, young black and brown kids are out in the street protesting, and I think I saw this beautiful sign by this white brother that was holding it up, and it says, "Black lives, all lives matter. Right now, we're talking about black lives." So, let's take turns, and let's listen to the indigenous. My wife is a professor at UC Berkeley. She has this beautiful thing. She says, "Let's listen to the indigenous knowledge." That means the word on the street. That means people in neighborhoods that want to talk to us, we shouldn't ignore their knowledge. It's very important. So when you see the guys with the cameras running around and the reporters sticking microphones after a shooting, and everybody's telling you the stories right here, the stories right here, the stories right here. We need to listen to the indigenous knowledge and stop being so quantitative and qualitative. Qualitative. I'm sorry, stop being so quantitative and listen to indigenous knowledge within your environment. It's important. It's important. So I'm very optimistic, and I'm so blown away by being here in front of you all and your time, and let's just keep pushing it forward. Thank you.
John, do you want to quickly have some concluding remarks, and then we'll go to Tina?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I am optimistic because it's within our power.
That's simple.
We can take responsibility for our lives and our democracy and holding our elected officials accountable or not. And if we do, we're going to save lives. If we don't, we're going to keep going the way we're going. You know, I am involved in the opioid crisis too, and we got the voice of law enforcement to say we can't arrest our way out of this opioid crisis. People need help. They need treatment, not jail. And getting these conservative voices, reaching people on whatever level you can is my greatest hope and our greatest opportunity. We're all human beings. And nobody is born wanting to die with a needle in their arm. Nobody is born wanting to die for a violent death from firearms. Somehow we just have gotten so obsessed with our electronic devices, and we're not communicating with each other anymore, and we are not taking any responsibility for our actions, and we're not taking any responsibility for our democracy. And what I've tried to do here in Massachusetts, we have done here in Massachusetts, is we have proven by taking responsibility and holding elected officials accountable, you can save lives, and believe it or not, you can really feel good about yourself, and you can create a little bit of dopamine without an email or a text. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, because look where we are, BU School of Public Health. But yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, we can turn this thing around, but we're going to have to. No one else is going to do it for us.
Yes. Tina, do you want to do the same thing you did for me?
Yeah, I mean, I am hopeful. 24 years, I'm still here. Sometimes I feel like a nut, sometimes I don't. Yet, I think, you know, we've talked about public health. For me, I will honestly say to you, my faith is what has me here today. My faith is what has me. See, research says, and I've learned to like researchers, if there are any researchers in the room, I've learned to value you now because I realize with your data, I'm a sane person. Yet with your same data, I'm also a nut. Because that's what research tells someone who's been impacted by murder, trauma, grief, and loss. Homicidal, suicidal, addicted to drug, or an alcoholic. That's me. The landmines are right there in front of me. Those are my children. That is my community. Yet, understanding the public health approach, the spiritual component of this, that's what I choose to. So knowing that every day, every single day, is a struggle for me to get up, put shoes on that match, comb my hair, and look like I'm sane every day. Yet, it is my faith. I pray, I practice, and I plan my day. And then I'm ready to come out and do things like that. So I'm hopeful and hoping that as researchers, as educators, as policymakers, as future or current news reporters, come in up close and personal. Come in and ask and feel uncomfortable. And then don't write a story, write the story. The story of heart, the story of someone who has been impacted by the worst of the worst. And really show that hope that we can be an environment, we can be a country where all families can live in peace and that we are all valued. So yes, I am hopeful. And I'm even more re-energized. And just to end, right now, at the State House, H742, an act to amend the state's victim compensation, just to give families who look like me, whose loved ones were murdered on the streets of our Commonwealth, burial assistance. That statute says if it deemed that the victim contributed to his or her own demise, that family is not eligible for the state's victim compensation. So that's my last pitch to you. Help us to amend that law. Simple law. Yes, I'm hopeful because of you and because of all of you. Thank you.
So thank you to all our panel members and all of you for actually sitting through this and really participating. Thank you so much. So let me also thank our event sponsors, the College of Communications, School of Public Health, Activist Lab, and the Pulitzer Center. We're going to have some closing remarks by Rebecca Kaplan from the Pulitzer Center, and also Jan is going to introduce a video frame from Carlos. Thank you, guys.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Kaplan from the Pulitzer Center, and I want to thank you all for being here today. I want to thank our panelists, and I think they deserve another round of applause. All of our speakers, just fantastic, amazing job today. And thank you to the School of Public Health and the College of Communications for organizing this, in particular Jen Beard and Donahue for all your amazing work. Boston University is one of the founding members of the campus consortium at the Pulitzer Center. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Pulitzer Center, we are a nonprofit organization who funds international journalism and then does education outreach and community outreach with it, which is what we're here doing today. Carlos is one of our grantees, and we've helped support his work in the past. And I want to encourage you all not to give up on journalism. And part of that I think is something that you all can do right here on campus in terms of what we do here as part of the campus consortium is working together with both the College of Communications and the School of Public Health is to take global health and tell stories with it. And what's so fantastic about the program here is the interdisciplinary nature of saying, usually people in public health, global health get siloed into doing numbers, only talking to each other about it at conferences, publishing papers in academic journals, and not interacting with the public or bringing that story to the public. And people on the journalism side maybe talk to an expert every once in a while about their story, but that's it. But this program here really brings that together and encourages people in journalism and in global health and public health to tell stories. And hopefully, again, to bring the story, right? And bring it in front of people. And so I want to thank you all. I also want to encourage you, for the students in the audience, to think about the Student Reporting Fellowship. And we have our student fellows in the back, Lauren and Maddie. And so you'll learn more about this opportunity going forward, but basically this is an opportunity for you to do the exact same thing our journalists get to do, is that you get to apply, and if you get the fellowship, you get to go do international reporting, right? You get to go be the journalist, and you get to come back and share that story. All right, and I'm now going to turn things over to Javier to introduce the video.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to mention and follow up on what Rebecca was saying, that we do have this reporting fellowship, and we want you to apply. So if you're in the College of Communication or the School of Public Health, talk to me or Ann Donahue, who is sitting over here in the front. And applications, we usually put out the call for applications in January, and we take applications. The deadline is usually sometime in March. And she and I are going to be teaching the very first global health storytelling class, which is an interdisciplinary class that will have an SPH number soon, and it will be cross-registered. And one of the things we ask is that comm students take an SPH class, and SPH students take a comm class. Now you can sort of do it in one class, and we can bring you together and cross-pollinate. So that's all I'm saying. And I just want to introduce Carlos's video. So we have food and drinks, and we want you to go back and enjoy it. But we're going to play his video too. You can also download it if you Google his name. But his video is called "We All We Got," and it's an urban elegy, and it's telling the stories we've heard today. And just for something for you to sit with and think about. And thank you.